The rain came down like grief, heavy, relentless, as if the sky itself were trying to wash something away. Naomi Prescott gripped the steering wheel tighter, her diamond bracelet glinting faintly in the stormlight. The GPS had lost signal miles ago, and her sleek black Mercedes had coughed its last breath right outside a forgotten little town called Maple Hollow. She tried the ignition again. Nothing, only the hollow sound of her own breathing. Perfect, she muttered, half laughing, half crying. Of course the car dies. Of course I'm alone. Outside, the wind howled through the pine trees that lined the road. The headlights caught a rusted sign leaning to one side. Welcome to Maple Hollow. Population 3, 182. Naomi pressed her phone. Dead. No signal. No bars. No help. She sat there for a long moment, listening to the rain pound the roof until it became unbearable. The silence of someone used to being surrounded by noise, applause, and power, now stranded in the quiet heart of nowhere. Finally, she pushed open the door. The rain hit her face like shards of glass. Her designer heels sank into mud. She took one shaky step, then another, until a pair of headlights cut through the storm. A pickup truck, old and dented, rolled slowly toward her. Its engine rumbled like an old bear waking up from sleep. Naomi tensed. Her heart hammered. The driver's door opened, and out stepped a tall man in his 30s, broad shoulders, oil-stained flannel shirt, jeans, patched at the knees. In one arm he carried a little girl fast asleep, her curls damp, her tiny hand clutching a stuffed bunny. Car trouble. His voice was calm, steady, and strangely gentle against the roar of rain. Naomi tried to sound strong. I'll be fine, But her voice cracked. The rain was too cold, the night too dark, her pride too thin to protect her. He shifted the child in his arms, then took a cautious step closer. Ma'am, I can take a look. There's a garage 2 miles down. Mine. Naomi hesitated, shivering, mascara running. You're a mechanic. He nodded. Name's Jake. Jake Miller. For a moment their eyes met hers, desperate and lost. His kind but weary, the kind of weariness that comes from carrying more than one life alone. Jake crouched by the car, inspecting under the hood with one hand while keeping his daughter close. The rain streaked down his face, but he didn't flinch. Alternators shot, he said finally. Won't make it through the night. Naomi exhaled in frustration. I just need to get to New York tomorrow. Jake gave a soft, knowing smile. City girl, huh? You folks always in a hurry to leave places like this. She crossed her arms. I'm not you folks. She stopped herself, realizing she didn't owe an explanation to a stranger. Look, he said, standing up. You can wait in the truck while I tow this back. It's warm, and my kid's asleep anyway. Naomi looked at the small child resting against his chest, peaceful, untouched by the storm, and something in her heart shifted. She nodded silently. Minutes later, she found herself sitting in the old pickup, the smell of motor oil and cinnamon filling the air. The girl murmured in her sleep, and Jake reached over, tucking the blanket around her tiny shoulders. Naomi watched him in the dim glow of the dashboard light. His rough hands, his quiet patience, the faint trace of sadness that never left his face. He caught her staring and smiled faintly. Don't worry, Ms. Naomi, she said quickly. Just Naomi. He nodded once. All right then, just Naomi. We'll get you somewhere dry. The truck rumbled down the winding road. Naomi stared out the window, watching the rain blur the world into silver streaks. Somewhere deep inside, a strange ache bloomed, the kind that whispered she was exactly where she was supposed to be, even if she didn't know why. And as the headlights sliced through the dark, Jake's gaze hardened for a fleeting moment. On the keychain hanging from her purse, he had noticed the faint engraving, P.H., Prescott Holdings. His jaw tightened. Prescott. the same name that once appeared on the letter that had shut down his father's factory, the letter that destroyed their lives. But he said nothing. Not yet. Because fate, it seemed, had a cruel sense of irony, and tonight it had delivered the daughter of the man he despised right into his arms. Sometimes, life doesn't bring us storms to punish us. It brings them to help two broken hearts find shelter in the same place. If this story touched you, take a moment tonight to remember, love often begins where comfort ends, in the rain beside a stranger, when all the lights go out, but one stays. The rain had softened into a steady whisper by the time Jake's truck pulled into the driveway of a small weathered house at the edge of town. A crooked mailbox leaned under a maple tree, its red flag hanging down, like it too was tired of the storm. Naomi pressed her hands against the seat, unsure whether to step out. The porch light flickered to life, bathing the wooden steps in a soft amber glow. The place looked nothing like the sleek glass-walled apartments she was used to, yet something about it felt alive. Jake opened the door, still holding his sleeping daughter. "Come on," he said quietly. "You'll catch your death out there." She followed him inside. Warmth greeted her first, a living, breathing warmth that came not from expensive insulation, but from the smell of cinnamon, old pine, and waffles. The small living room was cluttered but comforting, children's drawings on the refrigerator, a pair of muddy sneakers by the door, and a couch with a blanket thrown carelessly over the back. "This is cozy," Naomi said, hesitating as her wet heels clicked against the floorboards. Jake gave a small smile. "That's polite for small, I guess." "I didn't mean," she started, but he waved it off. "It's all right. It's home." He laid Ava gently on the couch, pulling a soft fleece blanket over her. The little girl stirred, murmuring something about pancakes, before settling back to sleep. Jake crouched beside her, brushing a curl from her forehead, with a tenderness that made Naomi look away. He stood, rubbing the back of his neck. "You can use the guest room. It's down the hall. Sheets are clean, I think." Naomi blinked. "You don't have to." "I insist," he said simply, his tone quiet but firm. "You've had enough of the rain for one night." In the small bathroom, she found a towel that smelled faintly of soap and sawdust. The mirror was speckled with age, and the sink had a tiny crack running along the edge, but somehow she didn't mind. She caught her reflection, smeared mascara, damp hair, tired eyes, and almost laughed. She looked nothing like Naomi Prescott, the poised executive who never left home without eyeliner and control. When she stepped back into the living room, Jake was sitting cross-legged on the floor, his head bowed. His large hands rested gently on Ava's back, moving in slow circles. The light from the lamp cast him in warm gold. Then she heard it, his voice low and breaking slightly as he whispered, "Mommy's in the sky, baby girl. She told me to always keep you warm, always." Naomi froze. The words slipped through her chest, like a quiet prayer settling somewhere deep. There was no performance in his tone, no pretense, just raw love, fragile and unguarded. She looked at him, the man with grease on his hands and grief in his heart, and something inside her trembled. For years, she had surrounded herself with men who talked about ambition, mergers, and money. Not one of them had ever spoken to a child with such reverence. Jake looked up, startled, to find her watching. "Sorry," he said softly. "Didn't mean to." She shook her head. "No, it's beautiful." For a long moment, silence filled the room, the kind that wasn't awkward, but sacred, as if the rain outside had paused to listen. Naomi glanced at Ava, then back at Jake. "Her mom." He nodded once, eyes on the sleeping child. "Died when she was born. Complications. I'm sorry." He shrugged slightly. "Some nights are harder than others, but Ava keeps me steady. Naomi opened her mouth, then closed it again. There were no words that fit. She simply nodded, her throat tight. He stood, stretching his voice, turning gentle again. There's soup on the stove if you're hungry. Not fancy, but it'll do. She smiled faintly. I don't think I've ever had soup that wasn't delivered in a box. Then you're in for a wild night, he teased. They shared a quiet laugh, soft, unsure, but real. Later, Naomi sat on the edge of the guest bed, wrapped in one of Jake's old flannel shirts. Through the thin wall, she could hear him humming, low, steady, the kind of sound that makes a house feel like a heartbeat. Her world had always been too loud. Elevators, conferences, the constant ping of her phone. But here in this modest home, there was only rain warmth and the faint hum of a father keeping a promise. Naomi lay back, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in years, she didn't feel powerful or successful. She just felt human. And as sleep slowly claimed her, she realized something she'd forgotten long ago. Not all shelter has walls. Some shelter comes from people who still know how to love. Morning came with sunlight slipping through faded curtains and the smell of coffee drifting through the hallway. Naomi woke to the sound of laughter, small bubbling giggles that didn't belong to conference rooms or phone calls. She followed the sound into the kitchen. Jake was standing at the stove, barefoot, wearing the same flannel shirt from the night before. His sleeves were rolled up, and a towel hung over his shoulder. Beside him stood Ava, perched on a stool, stirring pancake batter with exaggerated seriousness. Naomi lingered in the doorway. The scene felt like something out of a life she had never lived, unpolished, imperfect, yet achingly beautiful. Jake looked over his shoulder. Morning sunshine. Hope you like chaos. We're a breakfast at your own risk kind of family. Naomi smiled faintly. I can see that. Ava waved with the whisk. We're making pancakes. Want to help? Naomi hesitated. I'm not really much of a cook. Jake chuckled. Then you'll fit right in. Soon she found herself standing at the counter, hair still damp, sleeves rolled up, trying not to spill batter. Ava watched her closely, brown eyes, bright with amusement. You're stirring too fast, the little girl instructed. You have to be gentle. Pancakes don't like to be rushed. Naomi laughed. Neither do I, apparently. Jake handed her a heart-shaped cookie cutter. Ava's rule: pancakes have to be made with love, or they taste like cardboard. Ava nodded solemnly. It's true. Mommy said that before she went to heaven. The kitchen grew quiet for a heartbeat. Jake turned the pancake in the skillet, pretending not to hear the sudden hitch in his daughter's voice. Naomi placed a gentle hand on Ava's shoulder. Then let's make them with all the love we can. Okay. The little girl smiled again, the sadness melting as quickly as the butter in the pan. By noon, the table was covered in flour syrup and laughter. Naomi had flour on her cheek, Jake had a burn on his thumb, and Ava declared it the best breakfast ever. After breakfast, Jake headed to the garage to check on the replacement part for Naomi's car. She stayed behind, insisting on cleaning up. For the first time in years, she washed dishes by hand. The warm water and clinking plates brought an unexpected calm, a rhythm that felt healing in its simplicity. When she finished, she wandered to the porch. The street outside was quiet, lined with mailboxes and old oak trees. A man across the road was fixing his fence. Two women sat on their steps, gossiping with glasses of sweet tea. Every few minutes, someone waved. Every time, Naomi waved back. It was strange in New York. Surrounded by thousands, she often felt invisible. Here, in a town of barely 3,000, she felt seen. Later that day, Jake invited her to walk to the market with him and Ava. They took the long way past the diner, the library that only opened on Thursdays, and a church with peeling white paint. Everyone they met greeted Jake by name. Hey, Jake. The carburetor fix working. How's Ava's cold? And when they looked at Naomi, tall polished, clearly, not from around here, no one asked who she was. They just smiled and said, "Afternoon, ma'am." At the corner market, Ava tugged at Naomi's sleeve, pointing to a small table stacked with jars of homemade jam. "Can we get the strawberry one? Daddy says it's too sweet, but I think that's why it's perfect." Naomi laughed. "I'll buy it." "Don't tell him." The child grinned, a small conspirator's joy lighting her face. As they walked home, Naomi found herself asking about everything: the church bells, the schoolyard, the festival posters tacked on lampposts. Jake answered easily, telling stories of pancake breakfasts, town fairs, and Friday night dances at the fire station. "You actually dance," she teased. He smirked. "When bribed with enough pie. I'll keep that in mind." When they reached the house, Ava ran ahead to feed the stray cat that lived by the porch. Jake paused beside Naomi. "You look different," he said softly. She raised an eyebrow. "Different lighter," he said after a moment. "Like the city finally let go of you." She didn't know how to respond, but she smiled anyway, a quiet, real smile that reached her eyes. That evening, Naomi helped prepare dinner again: grilled cheese and tomato soup. Simple, honest food. She sat with Jake and Ava at the small wooden table, listening to the soft hum of a country radio station and the clatter of spoons. Ava took a big bite of her pancake from earlier, left over from breakfast, now cold, but still heart-shaped. Between bites, she said with full conviction, "You know, Miss Naomi, pancakes only taste good when they're made with love." Naomi laughed, but her throat tightened. "Is that so?" Ava nodded, serious. "Uh-huh. That's what Mommy said. Daddy makes them with love every time. That's why they're perfect." Naomi looked at Jake, his hands rough, his eyes soft, his smile shy, and felt something in her chest she couldn't name. It wasn't pity. It wasn't admiration. It was warmth, slow, steady, unfamiliar, but deeply alive. For years she'd chased perfection, perfect men, perfect jobs, perfect plans. But sitting there in that worn-down kitchen, with syrup on the table and laughter in the air, Naomi realized something that stopped her heart for just a beat. Love didn't need to be perfect. It only needed to be true. The following week moved like sunlight through clean glass, clear, bright, and full of quiet joy. Jake's garage, once half forgotten at the edge of Maple Hollow, began to hum with new life. Naomi worked beside him every morning, her laptop open on a small wooden table next to a pile of oily rags. She had designed a new logo, Jake's Honest Garage, simple white letters on navy blue. She took photos of Jake fixing cars, his hands steady and sure, and posted them on the website she built herself. Within days, business doubled. Locals came with old trucks and newer ones from 2 towns over. They said they'd seen the ad online, a garage that repairs more than engines. Jake laughed when he read that tagline. "You wrote that." Naomi grinned. "Guilty. It's true, though." He shook his head but smiled. "You've got a way with words. And you," she teased, "have a way with miracles." They worked in a rhythm that felt effortless. He fixed, she wrote. He built, she shared. At night they cooked together, sometimes with Ava's help, which meant twice as many dishes, but 3 times as much laughter. For the first time, Jake began to imagine a future, not weighed down by the past. Until the morning, the newspaper came. He was wiping grease from his hands when the delivery truck dropped off a stack of local gazettes by the diner across the street. His friend Tom, the postman, jogged over, waving one in the air. "Hey, Jake, looks like your shop's gone famous," he said, half joking, handing him the paper. On the front page was a photo of Naomi smiling in front of the garage. The headline read, Prescott heiress breathes new life into small-town business. Jake froze. The words hit him harder than he could explain. His eyes traced the name twice, then again. Prescott. He felt something twist in his chest, an old buried anger he hadn't touched in years. Tom kept talking oblivious. Guess she's some big shot in New York. They say her daddy owns half the state. What's he doing sending her here, huh? But Jake wasn't listening. He turned toward the garage where Naomi was laughing with Ava, holding a wrench twice her size. He crossed the road slowly, each step heavier than the last. When Naomi looked up, her smile faltered. "Jake," she asked, seeing the paper in his hand. He tossed it on the counter, the pages crumpling. "You want to tell me what this is?" Her eyes darted to the headline. All the color drained from her face. I was going to explain. When he cut in, voice low but trembling. "After you rebuilt my whole life, or after you left again." Naomi swallowed hard. "I wasn't hiding it to deceive you. You just what?" His voice sharpened. "Didn't think we'd find out. You're Naomi Prescott. Your father bought the mill, shut it down, and walked away with every last cent, while the rest of this town fell apart." Her lips trembled. "I know what he did. I was 20 when it happened. I tried to make him stop Jake, but he wouldn't listen." He turned away, running a hand through his hair. "My dad lost his job there. 40 years of work gone overnight. He died 3 months later. Stress, the doctor said. Heart failure. But it wasn't his heart that failed him, Naomi. It was men like your father." Naomi's eyes glistened. "I'm not my father." Jake's reply came like a quiet blow. "Then why hide it?" She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Because she knew the truth. She had hidden it not to manipulate, but because she'd seen that same flash of anger in too many eyes before. "I just wanted to be seen for who I am," she whispered. "Not what my name means, not what my father did." Jake looked at her, then really looked, and for a moment his anger cracked, revealing something else beneath it. Disappointment, betrayal, hurt. He stepped back, voice softer, but colder. "You could have told me. I would have respected that." "Would you?" she asked quietly. "Or would you have slammed the door before I ever got the chance to show you who I really am?" He hesitated, and that hesitation was answer enough. Naomi's hands shook as she gathered her things from the counter. The keys, the laptop, the notebook full of sketches she'd made for his shop sign. Ava stood in the doorway, confusion clouding her small face. "Miss Naomi," the girl asked, "why's Daddy mad?" Naomi knelt down, tears spilling freely now. "Oh, sweetheart, sometimes grown-ups just make mistakes." Ava frowned, her little hands reaching out. "But you made pancakes with love. That means you're family." Jake turned away, jaw tight. "Ava, go inside." Naomi's straightened voice barely steady. "I'll pack my things tonight." "You don't have to," he said without looking at her. "You can leave now, same way your father did." The words landed like stones. She wanted to fight back, to scream that she wasn't him, that she'd never meant to hurt anyone. But instead, she just nodded, because sometimes the only thing left to say is silence. Outside, the wind carried the faint echo of the church bell across town. Naomi walked toward her car, the gravel crunching beneath her heels. Behind her, Jake stood on the porch, the newspaper still crumpled in his hand, a small-town man staring at the woman who'd made him believe, for a fleeting moment, that the past could be forgiven. But the truth once spoken has its own kind of gravity, and that night, it pulled them both apart. The train pulled into Grand Central just after midnight. Naomi stepped onto the platform, surrounded by the restless hum of New York taxis, honking shoes, clicking neon lights, reflecting off wet concrete. It was a city she once called home, but tonight it felt foreign. She took the elevator up to her penthouse, all glass and silence. The view was magnificent. The skyline stretched endlessly, every window burning with life. Yet as she stood there watching the city pulse beneath her, it felt hollow, like staring into a jewelry box that glittered but held nothing real. Naomi dropped her bag, still streaked with country dust, onto the polished marble floor. Her reflection in the window stared back at her perfect hair-tailored coat and eyes that no longer belonged to the woman who had laughed over heart-shaped pancakes. Her phone buzzed on the counter. Dozens of unread messages from her assistant, her father colleagues. She ignored them all. For the next few days, she returned to her old rhythm morning meetings. High heels, polite smiles, the steady drone of ambition. Everyone said she looked radiant, successful, recovered. But inside, she felt like a ghost walking through her own life. Every now and then her mind wandered back to Maple Hollow, the hum of Jake's truck, Ava's giggle, the warmth of a home where the only luxury was love. One gray afternoon, as Naomi sat in her corner office overlooking Fifth Avenue, her assistant Claire walked in holding a tablet. "You've gone viral," she said, half smiling. Naomi blinked. "Viral? Someone tagged you in this. It's been shared 1,000,000 times." Claire pressed play. The screen showed Jake's garage, sunlit humble. The video had been filmed by a passerby. An elderly woman stood beside her car, a flat tire sagging in the dirt. She looked frail, her hands trembling as she clutched her purse. Jake knelt beside the car, his shirt streaked with oil, his expression calm. "You don't owe me anything, ma'am," he said in that familiar steady voice. "You keep your money. Just promise me you'll drive safe, all right?" The woman's voice cracked. "I don't even know how to thank you." Jake smiled, small and sincere. "You already did. You reminded me. Kindness still matters." He closed the trunk, waved her off, and turned to the camera with a shy laugh. "People think fixing cars is hard," he said, "but fixing hearts, that's where the real work is." Naomi's breath caught. The video blurred as tears filled her eyes. She reached out and touched the screen as if she could feel him through it. Claire hesitated. "You know him?" Naomi wiped her cheeks quickly. "Once," she said softly. "I think I still do." That night she couldn't sleep. The city outside her window glowed like a promise she no longer believed in. She walked barefoot across the cold floor, the sound of her steps echoing in the emptiness. Every corner of the apartment, the designer kitchen, the velvet couch, the framed art, whispered one truth. None of it had ever made her feel alive. In the silence, memories came rushing back. Jake's voice warm, grounded, unpretentious. Ava's laughter bright as morning. The smell of cinnamon and coffee. The way the rain sounded against his porch roof, soft and forgiving. Naomi sank to the floor, covering her face with her hands. The tears came quietly, the kind that don't just fall, they ache their way out. She remembered the look on Jake's face when he said, "You can leave now," the same way your father did. It wasn't anger that had haunted her, since it was disappointment. She had reminded him of the pain he'd spent his life trying to bury. But more than that, she realized he had seen her, the woman behind the last name, behind the armor, and she had let him go. The next morning, Naomi walked into the Prescott Holdings boardroom, where her father was reviewing quarterly reports. He looked up, surprised. "Naomi, I didn't know you were back." She stood tall, her voice calm. "I'm not staying long." Her father frowned. "You have responsibilities here." "I've spent my whole life living them," she replied. "Maybe it's time to take responsibility for myself." Douglas Prescott studied her for a moment, then sighed. "This about that mechanic," she didn't flinch. "It's about me. He shook his head. That's not your world, Naomi. Those people, she interrupted, are the best kind I've ever met. For once he had no reply. She turned and left the room, her heels clicking against the marble floor. Each step felt lighter than the one before. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, Naomi sat by the window once more. The city glowed gold for a fleeting second before night swallowed it whole. She opened her phone and re-watched the video, Jake's voice gentle and sure filling the quiet. He hadn't just fixed a tire. He had reminded her that goodness didn't disappear. It simply waited for people brave enough to believe in it again. And somewhere between the hum of engines and the rush of traffic far below, Naomi knew she'd left Maple Hollow. But a part of her heart had stayed behind in a small house that smelled of cinnamon and love, with a man who never stopped keeping his promises. The bus rattled down the narrow country road, its windows streaked with the dust of early spring. Naomi pressed her forehead against the cool glass, watching the fields roll past, green, wide, and endless. The same road that had once led her away now carried her back. In her lap sat a small paper bag folded carefully at the top. Inside was a wrapped box for Ava, a tiny silver bracelet engraved with the words, "Made with Love." Beneath it lay a handwritten letter, creased from her nervous fingers. She'd written and rewritten it a dozen times before deciding to stop trying to make it perfect. When the bus stopped at Maple Hollow's main street, Naomi stepped off and stood still for a moment. The air smelled like pine and rain. The town looked exactly the same, quiet, slow, timeless. Yet she felt completely different, stripped of the noise that once defined her. Jake's garage was still there at the edge of town. The painted sign she'd designed, Jake's Honest Garage, hung a little crooked now, the paint beginning to fade. She smiled softly at the sight of it, before her chest tightened with nerves. Through the open bay doors, she could see him. Jake was bent over the hood of a pickup, sleeves rolled up, hands steady as ever. The years of work showed in every movement, patient, deliberate, kind. Naomi took a deep breath and stepped closer. The sound of her heels on gravel made him glance up. For a long, suspended moment, they simply stared at each other. Jake straightened slowly, wiping his hands on a rag. His expression was unreadable, not angry, not welcoming, just cautious. "Hi, Jake," Naomi said quietly. He nodded once. "Naomi." Her fingers tightened around the paper bag. "I know I have no right to show up here. She swallowed hard. "I came to say I'm sorry. For not telling you the truth, for hurting you, for leaving without saying goodbye." Jake leaned against the workbench, silent. The hum of a fan filled the air. Naomi continued, her voice trembling. "You were right. I was hiding, not because I didn't trust you, but because I didn't trust myself. I was afraid you'd see the part of me I've spent years trying to escape." He looked down at his hands, his jaw tight. "You didn't have to run," he said finally. "You just had to be honest." "I know," she whispered, "and I should have been. That's why I'm here." From behind the truck, a small voice suddenly squealed. "Miss Naomi." Naomi turned, just in time to see Ava running full speed across the floor, curls, bouncing paint stains on her overalls. The little girl threw her arms around Naomi's waist, so hard, the bag almost slipped from her hand. "I told Daddy you'd come back," Ava said breathlessly, her face pressed into Naomi's coat. "He said, maybe you were too busy, but I knew you weren't." Naomi knelt, hugging her tight. The smell of crayons and soap filled her senses, so familiar, it made her eyes sting. "I missed you, sweetheart," she murmured, "more than you know." Jake exhaled softly, the sound barely audible. Something in the air, fragile and heavy, shifted. Ava looked up, eyes wide with innocence. Did you bring pancakes? Naomi laughed through her tears. Not pancakes, but I brought you something. She handed the paper bag to Ava, who opened it carefully. When she saw the bracelet, she gasped. It's beautiful. Look, Daddy. Jake glanced at it, a simple shining band, small enough to fit a child's wrist. He didn't speak, but his eyes softened just a fraction. I also brought this, Naomi said, pulling a folded envelope from her pocket. It's for you. Jake hesitated before taking it. The paper was smudged, the edges wrinkled. He unfolded it slowly. Her handwriting was neat, deliberate, the kind of letter written by someone who'd run out of excuses and finally found her truth. He read in silence. I don't want forgiveness. I only want you to know that meeting you changed everything I thought I knew about love and decency. You showed me that kindness isn't weakness and honesty isn't naive. It's courage. If you ever find room in your heart for me again, I'll be here quietly hoping. Naomi, when he finished, he said nothing for a long time. The air between them felt thick with what neither could say. Finally, Jake folded the letter and tucked it into his back pocket. His voice, when it came, was quiet but steady. You didn't have to bring anything, Naomi. Ava already got her favorite gift. Naomi frowned slightly. She did. He nodded toward his daughter, who had slipped her small hand into Naomi's. Her wish came true. Naomi's breath caught. Ava looked up at her and grinned. See, I told you he'd stop being grumpy when you came back. Jake laughed softly despite himself, the sound rusty but warm. He shook his head. This kid's got a bigger heart than both of us combined. Naomi smiled through her tears. Then maybe she can teach us how to use it. For the first time since she'd arrived, Jake met her gaze fully. The anger that once clouded his eyes was gone, replaced by something gentler. Weary, maybe, but open. He looked at Ava, then back at Naomi. You hungry? He asked at last. I was gonna make grilled cheese. Naomi blinked, surprised by the simplicity of it, an invitation disguised as small-talk forgiveness, hidden in plain sight. I'd love that, she said softly. Jake turned toward the door, motioning for them to follow. As they stepped out into the late afternoon light, the clouds began to part. The sky stretched wide and gold, like a world starting over. Ava skipped ahead, bracelet glinting in the sun, her laughter echoing down the quiet street. Jake and Naomi walked side by side, not as strangers, not yet as lovers, but as two people brave enough to begin again. And in that quiet return, love fragile, uncertain, and deeply human, found its way back home. The morning of the reopening dawned clear and golden, the kind of day that seemed made for new beginnings. The sign outside the garage gleamed under the sun, Jake's Honest Garage, freshly repainted, its blue letters steady against the white wood. Naomi stood in front of it, arranging a row of small flower boxes she'd picked up from the market that morning. A few neighbors passed by, waving as they went. Mr. Clark from the hardware store stopped to help her hammer the last nail into place. Mrs. Donovan from the diner arrived with a basket of muffins and a thermos of coffee. No one called her Miss Prescott anymore. To them, she was simply Naomi, the woman who helped breathe life back into the garage that had once been the town's heartbeat. Inside, Jake moved around the workshop, wiping down the counters that gleamed with fresh paint. The smell of oil mixed with the faint sweetness of baked goods from outside. Ava darted between the two of them, her new bracelet flashing under the light as she hung paper streamers across the windows. When Naomi walked in, she paused, taking in the sight. It looks perfect, she said. Jake smiled slightly, setting down the wrench. It looks alive. By noon, the yard was full of people. Farmers, teachers, mechanics, families, all gathered to celebrate something small yet meaningful. The revival of an honest business, built by honest hands. Someone strung fairy lights along the roof, even though it was still daytime. Kids ran between the cars, chasing bubbles. Naomi had planned every detail: flyers, refreshments, even a banner that read, "A new chapter begins." She wasn't doing it to impress anyone. She was doing it because this place and the people in it had taught her what it meant to belong. When Jake stepped outside to greet the crowd, applause rippled through the air. He stood there for a moment, stunned, rubbing the back of his neck, as if unsure what to do with all that attention. Naomi leaned toward him, whispering with a grin, "You could at least wave." He chuckled, lifting his hand awkwardly. The crowd cheered louder. Someone asked him to say a few words. Jake hesitated, then nodded. He climbed onto the small porch where the sign hung and cleared his throat. "I'm not much of a speechmaker." He began, his voice steady but humble. "This garage used to be my dad's. When it shut down years ago, I thought everything good in this town had shut down with it. But I was wrong." He looked at Naomi, then his eyes softening. "Sometimes you have to lose something to learn how to rebuild. And sometimes someone comes along and reminds you why you should try." The crowd clapped, a few people even wiping their eyes. Naomi turned away for a moment, pretending to fix a napkin to hide the tears that threatened to spill. Later, when the crowd had thinned and the sun dipped lower, Jake found her standing alone near the porch steps, her hair catching the last of the light. The air smelled of dust and lemonade. Ava was asleep inside, curled up on a pile of blankets. Jake walked up beside her quietly. "You did all this," he said softly. "The sign, the flowers, the people showing up. This was you." Naomi shook her head. "It was us." He studied her for a moment, his voice low and earnest. "Naomi, I owe you an apology. I let my anger speak louder than my heart. When I found out who you were, I didn't see you. I only saw the name that took everything from me. I was wrong." She turned to face him, her eyes glistening, but calm. "You had every reason to be angry. I understand." He took a step closer. "Still doesn't make it right." Naomi's gaze softened. "Jake," she said gently, "I don't need anyone's forgiveness. I just want to be allowed to stay." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The faint sound of crickets rose in the distance. Jake reached out his rough, calloused hand, brushing against hers. "Then stay," he whispered. She smiled, small and trembling. "I plan to." They stood together in the fading light, the hum of the evening wrapping around them like a quiet promise. From the open door, the banner fluttered in the breeze. Jake's honest garage. But to the people who had gathered that day, and to Jake himself, it had come to mean more than a name. It stood for second chances, for kindness, rediscovered, for love rebuilt from the wreckage of the past. Naomi looked up at the sign one last time before turning back to Jake. "You know," she said softly, "I think your father would have been proud." Jake smiled, his voice barely a murmur. "I think he finally can be." The lights above them flickered to life as the sun disappeared, completely bathing the porch in a soft golden glow. In that light, warm, honest, forgiving, their hearts felt lighter, not because the past was gone, but because it no longer held them captive. And in the small town that had once been marked by loss, two people found something worth keeping, a love born, not from perfection, but from redemption itself. The sky was brushed in gold and lavender as evening settled over Maple Hollow. The hum of the day had quieted, leaving only the soft chirping of crickets and the rhythmic creak of the porch swing. Naomi sat there with Ava nestled against her side, the little girl's head resting on her shoulder, her curls warm against Naomi's cheek. Jake was in the yard, turning off the last of the lights strung from the trees, little bulbs that still glowed, faintly reminders of the day's celebration. The reopening of the garage had drawn the whole town, and though the laughter had faded, the warmth lingered like an aftertaste of joy. Ava yawned, tracing her finger along the silver bracelet Naomi had given her months before. "Miss Naomi," she murmured sleepily, "are you gonna stay forever?" Naomi smiled, smoothing a strand of hair from Ava's forehead. "Well," she said gently, "that depends. Do you think your daddy can stand my terrible cooking forever?" Ava giggled. "He already does." From the steps, Jake's voice carried softly through the dusk. "She's not wrong." Naomi looked up to find him watching them, sleeves rolled, hands in his pockets, eyes lit by the last glow of sunset. He walked over the wooden porch, creaking beneath his boots, and crouched beside them. Ava blinked up at him, half asleep. "Daddy, can we keep her?" Jake laughed quietly, brushing a thumb over his daughter's cheek. "That's not really how it works, sweetheart." Naomi leaned her head back against the swing, smiling. "Then how does it work?" Jake Miller. He hesitated, and for a moment she thought he might deflect with a joke. But instead, he reached into his back pocket. "Maybe like this." He pulled out a small silver ring, simple, unpolished, the metal catching the light like a secret. Naomi stared, breath-catching. "Jake." He turned the ring in his hand, almost shy. "It's not much. I made it myself, from a piece of that busted car that brought you here." She looked down at it, her eyes shimmering. "You made this?" He nodded. "Didn't want anything fancy, just something real, something that'll last." He paused, his voice low and steady. "Like us." Naomi pressed her fingers to her lips, her heart trembling somewhere between laughter and tears. Jake took a slow breath and met her eyes. "It's not perfect. Nothing about me is. But if you stay, I promise you this. I'll love you with the same hands that built this garage, fixed every broken thing, and held on when life tried to take it all away. It won't always be easy, but it'll be honest, and it'll be home." For a moment, the world seemed to stop. The wind moved gently through the trees. The porch light flickered like a heartbeat. Naomi looked at the man kneeling before her, the one who had taught her that kindness was stronger than pride, that forgiveness could grow from ruin, that love could be rebuilt from something as ordinary as faith. Tears spilled freely down her cheeks as she whispered, "Yes." Jake smiled the slow, quiet smile of a man who had waited his whole life to believe in hope again. Ava clapped her hands sleepily. "I told you she'd stay forever," she mumbled, before curling into Naomi's lap and drifting back to sleep. Naomi held her close as Jake slipped the ring onto her finger. The metal was cool, imperfect, and utterly beautiful. They sat together on the porch as night unfolded around them, the stars above the lights from the garage glowing faintly in the distance. On the wall inside, illuminated by a single golden bulb, hung the sign Naomi had painted weeks earlier: "Love doesn't fix cars. It fixes hearts." Jake followed her gaze and smiled. "Guess you were right," he murmured. Naomi turned to him, voice soft. "About what?" "That love's not about where you're from or what you own." He touched her hand gently. "It's about what you give every single day." Naomi leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. The night air was cool, but she felt no chill. For the first time in her life, she wasn't searching for belonging. She was already home. And as the stars blinked awake above the quiet town, her heart whispered the promise she'd waited her whole life to make, not just to Jake, but to herself. That love, when it's true, doesn't ask for perfection. It only asks that we stay and keep choosing each other again and again. True love doesn't measure wealth or titles. It begins where forgiveness meets courage in small hands that hold on in hearts that rebuild what pride once broke. And sometimes, the richest life you'll ever live is the one built with calloused hands, laughter, and time freely given to the people who make you feel like home.